This is Ivy Unleashed,
a Gold Ivy production.
Hello, everyone. How are we doing today, Andrea?
Wonderful. I'm excited to chat after some incredible episodes. The guests we've had on have been mind-blowing, and just feeling really grateful for the people that are landing in our path and what we're learning. And I feel like it's going to be a big year for growth for sure.
And to go with the G's, we've got grateful, we've got growth. We're going to talk about two more G's that are really relevant for us right now and that we keep reflecting on in just our conversations together. Something that we feel like we want to share with you all, because if it's relevant for us, it's probably relevant for you. And that is this idea of grace versus grit. The idea of being compassionate with ourselves when we are going through a hard time or just in general, while also buckling down, leveling up, pushing ourselves to be better, to do better. How do we find that balance? And as we wrap up our first year of business with Gold Ivy, with the Ivy Unleashed podcast, we are on fire day in and day out. We love what we're doing. It's fueling us, but we don't want to be burnt out. And there are those times where we're like, okay, I'm really, really tired. Do I get out of bed? Do I give myself another hour because I deserve it and my body needs it? Where is that fine line? And as you're listening, I want you to tune in and listen to what thoughts come to your mind. Whether you're a mom, a student, going through a hard time, training for a marathon, whatever it may be, how do you listen to your body and know when it needs some rest and when it needs to just power through?
Yeah, well, and if we're big book readers, and if you read any business book, it's like, you can sleep when you're dead. You need to hammer it for the first 5 years. You get up at 3 a.m. and you go to bed at 1 a.m. and you'll be fine. And Brooke and I are like,
I can't.
We don't want to do it like that. We want to enjoy the process. We want to be able to be present with the guests we have on. We don't want this to be a machine. We want this to be a new way of doing business where we can build it and it can have significant growth like Ivy Unleashed has. And maybe it would have been more exponential last year if we put out 3 episodes a week, but we would have been completely burned out. And we decided to take a couple months off at the end to refuel and to be really intentional. And, whether the business analysts would disagree with that route, we want to do this long term. And so we're really trying to be careful with this grit versus grace, because I'm a grit girl. I like to live boldly. I like to push myself. I like to go max speed. And it's tough for me to slow down and do the grace thing and really love on myself and have those moments of compassion, because I do think we have this one life and I want to maximize it, right? But if I'm not present and if I'm not taking time to rest and setting the phone down, setting business aside, and living my life face to face, eyes to eyes, like, what am I doing?
I think where I get in trouble and what I'm noticing is comparison. Grit gets me in trouble when I feel like I need to be doing so much more. So yesterday, for instance, it was after the long weekend, holiday weekend, and I enjoyed myself so much. It was family time. It was game time. Like, I never just sit there and play card games, like this ability to just fully be present, not worrying about my phone. I felt so refreshed come this morning, come yesterday. And yesterday morning I was supposed to run to train for a marathon. And I'm like, okay, my body hasn't worked out in 4 days. Like, going into 15 miles isn't going to happen. It was that time of the month. My body just, I knew that my body couldn't do it. And then I start reflecting, okay, Brooke, before you left for the holiday, you ran 7.5 miles. You ran the fastest you've ran. You made sure that everything was ready to go for 5 days when you were gone. Like, I did so much. I was so proud of myself. But then there's that feeling of not being enough, not doing enough, right? There's always things on the to-do list that need to get done. And so in that moment, I had to stop, give myself grace. I think it's the comparison versus compassion that is what I need to go into when I think about grace versus grit, right? What allows me to give myself grace is being compassionate towards myself, reflecting, thinking of all the things that I am doing, I have been doing, and that I'm not going to sit and rest forever, but I need to recharge. And then when it comes to the negativity side of grit is the comparison. And there's that fine line of not comparing.
What are you comparing to?
Other people.
Okay.
Right. We're thinking about, like, I'm thinking of this because you mentioned all the business analysts.
Okay.
Right. Like it's not how we want to do it, but it's everything that we're reading and we're doing it a different way.
Okay.
And that's what gets me in trouble, because I do believe in working hard and grit and pushing myself, but the past few years my body hasn't allowed me to, right? Like that's what got me in trouble. And so when I think about this topic, I think of what pushes me over that boundary. And this past year, I've gotten very aware of what that boundary is for me. And I think there can be the balance.
How do you know when you're getting close to the boundary? Like, how do you know when you're about to need some grace or rest? Like, what's your indicator?
My body screaming at me. I think the fogginess. Now that I'm on the other side of it, of these symptoms of like having really, really good days, it's when I haven't gotten enough sleep, or, you know, I think of when you say, you know, you can sleep when you're dead. Yes, but what about the work that we're putting in? You know, like what would that work be like? It wouldn't be authentic, because I wouldn't be able to get off my chest what I really want to say because I can't think clearly when I'm tired, right? Think about with just work in general or living your life in general. When you're tired, you're not coming to anything with your authentic self. I think it's a really touchy topic in this time of life where it's go, 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 push, hustle culture. I think there's a time and place for quote unquote hustling. But then what's your definition of hustling, and what are your boundaries around taking care of you while also meeting your goals, pushing yourselves, continually growing?
Yeah. Something that's coming to mind is like Britt Williams' episode on thinking about your time management. If you truly sit down and think about how you want to spend your time, and you're putting in social time with friends to unwind, and you're putting in 7 to 8 hours of sleep in there, and you have your values associated with the things that you do want to hustle and do, you can be more efficient during those pockets of time when you are working. You can be really diligent about getting up early that morning, because you know the next morning you're going to sleep in a little bit later. You know, you can start to pay attention to, you know, having that schedule and then being like, how did that go? I think part of grace for me is reevaluating. Something's off here. I'm feeling more anxious. I'm not able to fall asleep right away. I have too many worries. I'm not getting after it enough. I need to figure out a way to do this a little different. So I think of grace that way for me, because I like the idea of being the go-getter, of like tackling life and going for it. That just makes me feel good. I think everyone's different. You know, some people, it's more relaxing to think about grace. Like, I'm just going to live my life. And like, if I feel like I want to do something, I'll do it. Okay, cool. That doesn't work for me. For me, I'm like, no, I need to get up and make shit happen. You know, I want to be ahead of my day. I want to be able to have my things done, so when my kids are up, I can focus on them instead of being bitter that they're taking up time, or that I haven't gotten the things I needed to get done. You know, like that's such a crappy feeling for me. And so if you can kind of experiment with your time, you know, there is something I want to go after. I do have this status of health I want to go after this year. I do want to have something I want to do in business, or a new passion I want to attempt, or more books I want to read, or even like the smallest things. Like I just want to go for walks twice a week. Like, where am I going to fit it in? And start to experiment with your week, noticing like, oh, I can push myself. I can get some more grit in my week to see what I'm made out of, or what I want out of my time. Or there's something that I've been hearing is really good for me. I know I should be doing. I should be meal planning. where am I going to do it? When am I going to fit it in? When am I actually going to put it on my calendar? When am I actually going to go to the grocery store? I think with grit, you know, it's just prioritizing things in your schedule that you know you want to challenge yourself with so that you can have this intentional full life. Like, to me, grit is not the David Goggins style. Like, David Goggins is this incredible human being. He's like, I think they call him like the strongest man on earth or something. He wrote the book, You Can't Hurt Me. And it's a wonderful book. And it talks through his story of like this abuse he went through as a child and how he uses it to fuel him. And the problem I noticed in the book and how I'm different than him is, you know, I run these races too. You know, he ran marathons, he's ran ultras and done all kinds of wild things. And what he does is he basically hates on himself to get him through it. Like, calls himself names. And it got me thinking about like grit to David Goggins, you know. So he's done some like inhumane things, you know, pushed himself, like he could barely swim, and then he ended up like having weights on his ankles and like being underwater for minutes at a time. So he has accomplished a lot of things with the grit that he has. But also, as I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh, this sounds like trauma he hasn't worked through. Sounds like he has some really toxic relationships because he hates himself. And it works for these races. Cool. Like, he probably has a lot of money because he's written books and accomplished great things.
But what about when he's not running these races, right? Like, what about at night when he's just sitting with his thoughts? Right. I think grace is being proud of who you are in those moments when you've chosen grit. But grit for everyone is so different. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, I do think it's different. And I think you can think about grit. I think we have this vision that it needs to be this physical thing that you have to do and fight through. And I think it can be more uplifting than that, right? Like, I think about my experience as a runner and running a marathon, and there's grit required to get to the end. Like, a lot of bad things can happen, and to get to the finish line, I mean, that's why it's so addicting. That's why it's such a beautiful thing to witness as a fan or, you know, a spectator or whatever, is you watch people, they're clearly digging into some grit and it's getting them across the finish line. But I think of different ways to do it than like calling yourself names during the time, like saying like you're a pussy or you can't do this. I think part of you has to believe that if those are the thoughts that you're saying, right? And so I'm not saying you need to be like, Andrea, you're beautiful, you got this the whole time, but you can have different techniques for getting to the end of a race that don't require you to hate yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I want to cross the finish line and feel good about who I am. So I will like dedicate a mile to someone that I love or someone that gives me some perspective. Like Courtney Burnett, thinking about what she's been through. If I think about her at mile 25, I will fly, you know, instead of crawling, I will be running as fast as I can. Because I'm thinking about someone that has been through something worse than me, or that something I've been through that's worse than running a tough mile.
Yeah, I love how you said how you feel. I think as I reflect back on this past year working with Catherine, just where I want Gold Ivy to go and Ivy Unleashed and my health and just my life, one thing is clear is how do I want to feel? That's always what I come back to is how do you want to feel? What's going to get you to how you want to feel, right? Do you want to feel shitty about yourself and that's what's pushing you to run this marathon? And our new friend, Yuri, this guy that we've talked about, who we met in Kentucky, he does crazy races like David Goggins. He did a race in the Sahara Desert, and he had texted me last week and he said, how are you doing? How's your health? Checking in on me. And I say, I did it. I committed. I'm running a marathon with Andrea. I'm so excited. Things are so busy. And, I didn't even think about how my texts would come off. But his response was, remember, if you don't enjoy it, there's no point in it. I'm like, you're so right. And I think about what's gotten me through those miles, because right now I'm training on a treadmill. It's cold outside. It takes a lot of mental toughness of just staring and a lot of internal reflection and, what I'm loving about it is the mental toughness that it's giving me. And I think about when I first started training after my vein collapsed. For those that are new here, I was training for a marathon with Andrea in Nashville before COVID happened. And then COVID happened, it got canceled. And I also had a vein collapse. So it was meant to be that it got canceled. But the first time I was running after that, I was running around the lakes in Minneapolis. And I was terrified of what happens if a vein collapses again, right? Like, how could that thought not go through your head? And I'm forcing myself to think about okay, well, you know what? We're running. Like, this feels so good. This feels so good. And this girl in front of me, as I'm having just all of this negativity go through my head, this girl in front of me, the back of her shirt says grit. And it stands for greatness requires internal toughness. And I was like, yes. Internal toughness. What does internal toughness mean to you? And I don't think about the pushing myself. I think about showing up when I don't want to, right? Getting out of bed in the morning. These mundane habits that are allowing me to live the life I want to live, right? It's not glamorous. Going to bed at 9 p.m. so I can be up at 4 a.m. But when I get out of bed and I don't want to, or I stand with the lights on and I say, thank you, Lord, for another day. I'm so grateful. And I'm pushing myself to believe these things because I do, but at 4 a.m. it's a little tough. And I get in 8 miles on a treadmill, or last week when I got in 13 on a treadmill, and I'm like, hell yeah. Those small habits that add up. And in those moments, it's that internal toughness that gets me there. And so when I think about grit, it sounds scary until you break it down, and it's in those moments, it's those decisions that, although they might be small, they're mighty, and they add up. And it's in those decisions that each decision we make, it's a vote for the type of person that we want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think about that when I think about grit is what's going to get me through. Okay, let's take it a step back. What next decision do I need to make? Might not be glamorous. It might be going out and -7 degrees this morning to do yoga to allow me to feel better. And so I think both grit and grace is that feeling and knowing when you need a little bit more love and you need to push yourself a little more.
Mm-hmm. I think too, yeah, everybody's different and our personalities are different and everything, but you can feel in your body when you know you're not challenging yourself enough. You can feel when you've been lazy. You can feel when you're not connected to a higher purpose, right? And so I think grit can be thinking about goals that help you feel like you're living on purpose. Like, I'm doing this action because I've thought about it and I know it's important to me, right? So it's like, what business could you see yourself running? What topics have you wanted to learn more about? What passions have you thought about maybe pursuing? Like, grit is required for those things too. It's not just running a marathon. It's like actually thinking about what's important and chasing after it, because you have these regular habits you want to up level, right? But it requires shifting. It requires getting uncomfortable. And that's the grit. The grit doesn't have to be a Tough Mudder, it can just be shifting your life, because that's tough, because it requires everything around you to shift too. And what's nice is you can experiment with what you want to do and adapt and experiment and adapt until you get to a place where you feel like, I'm doing this a little bit more on purpose and I'm proud of myself for when it is hard to get out of bed, or when I'm like going to journal and it feels weird because I've never journaled before. I'm going to try this meditation app that I've never done, but I want to focus on lowering my anxiety, or I want to see if this creates some type of peace or calm in my relationships, or I have an anger issue that I've been wanting to talk with a therapist about, and I'm so uncomfortable to sign up and find one. How do I do that? It's like, that stuff requires grit too.
Yeah. And it's that decision, right? I always think about Mel Robbins and her 5-second rule. And her 5-second rule is basically this idea, and there's a bunch of science behind it. And so although it sounds silly, it's just counting down from 5. When you hit to 1, you blast off like a rocket ship and you make that decision. And the science behind it is that it takes 5 seconds for our reptilian brain to say, no, don't do that. That's new. That's foreign. And so we have a 5-second window to act where we're thinking with our prefrontal cortex, our logic, that, making new decisions that we know are good for us, but they're kind of uncomfortable. And so when you want to dive into grit, when you want to make a new decision, something that's going to support your health, but it's scary, it's new, it's uncomfortable, you give yourself 5 seconds and you don't think about it, you just do it, right? Like getting out of bed in the morning. You don't allow yourself to have that internal dialogue of, do I want to? You want to, just do it. Mm-hmm. Stop going back and forth in your head because you're convincing yourself to not do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also something to become aware of, is what thoughts are going on in your head. How are you talking to yourself? And knowing that whoever's talking up there, it's not technically you, as weird as that sounds. It's your conditioning, what you've been taught your whole life, and you're making a new change. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but we're so comfortable with this past life and who we are, this identity that we have, that although we may not want to still be there, we're almost grieving this identity of someone new.
Well, and everything's new because you're watching other people that are in your circle on their phones like you used to be, or they're binging the shows that all of a sudden that, I lost conversations. I am now in conversations with my neighbors that I cannot participate in. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I know it's worth it to me that I'm not binging a Netflix show and that I'm editing a podcast or I'm thinking about a way to build our business. That is more important to me, but it is a loss. With grit, there's sacrifice, right? It's training for a marathon. It's time. It's pushing your body. It's when you're trying to think about what you want to pursue and with passions, it's sitting quietly with a journal and writing things down, or it's getting a mentor and trying to learn something that's uncomfortable because you don't know things and you have to admit that you don't know something. It's uncomfortable. It's a shot to your ego, Yeah. But if it's what you truly want and you're aligned with it, you start to care less and less about the Netflix shows.
Well, you start to think about, God, I'm feeling good. But what I was going to say is that what isn't scary is thinking about just 1%, right? Doing something each day that makes me 1% better than who I was yesterday. It's the idea of small steps. It's the idea of not climbing the mountain, not running the marathon, but running 1 mile, starting somewhere, doing something that you're proud of. And I think just like discipline, just like willpower is this muscle that we build, it's the same thing for grit. You get used to being uncomfortable because you know that uncomfort isn't going to last, that it's only temporary, and that on the other side of that discomfort is who you want to be. It's that feeling of hell yes.
And doing that over and over and over shows you I can make shifts in any part of my life. I did it here in this part. I can do it in this part.
Well, I think that's why I want to run a marathon. It's just if I can do this, if I can run 20 miles on a treadmill, what else can I do?
Yeah.
Right?
You'll easily be able to run in with a bunch of spectators in a cool city and then knowing you get to celebrate after and wear a medal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. How do you think 10 years ago your perspective on grace versus grit would be different?
I would say as I've gotten older, I'm weaving in more grace. At 26, I didn't have any health issues, so keep that in mind. But I was working 2 jobs, and then shortly after, around 26, started a family and continued to have multiple jobs during that time. And so I was just pushing myself to max. And then once I had Cora, experienced some postpartum anxiety. And I think ever since then, I've had to weave in more grace. Being a mom, you have to have grace for yourself. Especially, I think it's so important. If you're listening to this and you're a new mom, or mom times however many times, and you have a baby that's not sleeping or toddlers that aren't sleeping, grit is so hard to even, you are doing grit. You are
grit.
You are the definition of grit.
Yeah.
I mean, surviving as a mother or father with little kids is so hard. You are developing a person's, emotional stability. Nothing is harder than that. I don't think that I've experienced in my life. Nothing is harder than being responsible for other human beings. And so if you're listening to this and you're a parent, or you're trying to be a parent, or you're thinking about being a parent eventually, like that whole chapter is grit. You know, it requires so much effort all the time. And sometimes you can't control how much sleep you get. Like my sister-in-law, Alicia, is getting like no sleep right now. Like if she told me she wanted to train for a marathon or take on a new passion, I would smack her. Like, no, you need to try and get some sleep. You need all the grace right now because you are gritting nonstop. But I think it's important to think about that too. You know, if you're listening to this and you're sick, or you just lost someone, or you've been grieving someone for a long time, or you are going through you have an unsafe environment at home, or you have toxic relationships you're sorting through, like that is the time for grace. And grit can wait. You are like going through any of that requires so much grit that's just different than the physicality of running a marathon. Like you're living life, and that requires a different type of grit. And so I hope that if you're in any of those spaces that you know it's a tough spot in your life, whether it's in work or at home or family, like whatever it is, that grace is so important that you weave that in. You know, you can find grace. You know, I find grace admitting when I make a mistake and learning from it and knowing like this is going to keep happening. Like I'm not a bad person. I'm a good example for my children to learn that you can admit when you did something wrong, or like if Justin and I have an argument, apologize to him in front of them. Like knowing that it's so important to experience life. It's important to have the grit of the emotions that you're experiencing and express them, because your kids need to see that. Your friends need to know how you feel. You cannot hold that shit in, because you're going to explode. I think like with grace for me, it's a lot I think about like making mistakes a lot, and there's no way not to when you're a parent and you're balancing all of the things and you have different personalities in your home. And I think if you're too hard on yourself all the time, like you're going to lose sleep over it. You're going to sabotage yourself or your relationships.
Or your health. Yeah. What I keep thinking of is no matter what your circumstances are, whether you're a mom, you're figuring out your health, you're going to school, you're just trying to figure out your career, you have to weave in both, right? There's finding the balance and holding space for both. Grit is doing things that are tough, but knowing that in the long run, it's making you a better person, you're leveling up, you're doing the best that you can do. And grace is allowing you to take care of yourself so that you don't burn out, right? Whether that be scheduling in 5 minutes every morning to meditate, to have some peace and quiet before your kids wake up, or, all right, I'm going to take a bath, an Epsom salt bath, just to relax before bed, to help with my health. Like little ways that you can have that self-care to calm your nervous system, to allow you to be healthy, to reach those goals. I think that's the balance that I'm learning. Is it's so important for me to reach these goals and level up, because I love how it makes me feel, right? Like I'm proud of myself. I'm just living the life that I want to live, but I can't run faster than the care I'm putting into myself.
I love that. I love that idea too. And I think something we touched on earlier with the hustle culture. And if you don't know what that means, like our culture is achieve, 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 go, 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 do. You're glorified in social media by all the things you're doing, by all the things you're buying, and you know, whatever. So I think sometimes people really struggle with grace. Like, what is grace even? And what does that mean? And as you're saying this, you know, it's caring for yourself. It's caring for your emotional well-being. It's checking in to make sure you're feeling okay. Am I anxious? Am I angry? Like, what am I feeling? And I think sometimes we don't know what to do with that. And I think that's where, you know, with grace, if you don't know how to weave that in, that's where professionals come in play, you know, or a close friend that you know is good at it. Like, oh, you seem to be like nice to yourself. I feel like you like yourself more than I like myself. How you doing that? You know? But that's where, you know, ideas from a coach come in. That's where a therapist comes in, because they can, that's their job. Their job is to give you grace, to validate how you're feeling, so you can kind of move through it and you can process it so that you can have space for grit.
Yes, space for grit. That's powerful. I think being realistic is so important too, right? Like you said about Alicia, like, it's not realistic for her to run a marathon right now because G-Friend needs sleep. And if I tried to run a marathon last year, like probably my system would have epically failed me because I don't have the space for it. And so before you make a big life change, decide to run a marathon, decide to go back to school, like, is it realistic for you? What do you need to do to ensure that you can handle it? And I also think that's where a professional comes into play, right? Like we think we can do so much, and I've learned firsthand, like, you can't.
Yeah. But I think if it's important for you to accomplish it, like when I think about Gold Ivy and maintaining Ivy Unleashed at the rate that we're going, if it's important to you, you need to care for it. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can do, but you need to care for it. And part of you pursuing your passions or part of you learning or growing as a person is to care for that being, and that is you. Mm-hmm. How are you going to care for yourself so you can have the energy to be creative? Like you said, you can't talk on a podcast if you're exhausted. Like, you need sleep. And so I think it's just important to think about, how am I going to care for myself so I can have more grit? Like, what am I going to do that's going to keep this train moving?
Mm-hmm. So that I can reach my goals, so that I can do the things that I want to do, but I do them in a way that I'm fully showing up. I'm not half-assing it, because that doesn't feel good. Think about the days when we have something to do and I just really don't feel good, and I'm like, I'm going to power through it. But I just share, hey, I'm really not feeling well. And you don't even, you may not even do anything different, but just to allow you to hold space for me to just ask for help, it lessens that burden. It allows me to give myself grace of, hey, I'm going through something hard.
And an opportunity for other people to give you grace. It's like a magnet.
Yeah.
And like makes it okay for you to rest. If someone else is like, oh, thank you for telling me, like, I got it. Mm-hmm.
I think it creates more humanness, right? Like, we're not robots. We're not just go, achieve. It's, oh yeah, you're going through something really hard, or yeah, you're really pushing yourself right now.
Yeah. And like, think about the people that you think of, like, if you think of grit, who comes to mind, and it's probably like super rich people or super athletic people, like people that have really pursued their passions, or they've been through, like Oprah, she's been through everything and she's where she is or whatever. But it's like every rich person or every athlete that gets to that point, like the first question they get after they win a gold medal is like, are you coming back next year? It's like, if you can't enjoy it, why are you doing it? Why are you having a podcast if you're not fully present in the moment? Like, I don't want you showing up exhausted. I don't want you showing up sick. Like, I want you to care for yourself so that we can have someone on like Dr. Rachel Allen and like have an episode of our life, being fully present with her so that our listeners can get the best of you and get the best of me. And so I just want to encourage everyone, like, we've got to care for ourselves. Like, we want you to push yourself. We want a big, full, intentional life. Yes, go after it. I'm always going to be the grit girl that's going to help you go after it. But you have to have grace for yourself. You have to know that you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to have weeks that you're off, and you're not going to always crush your goals, and you're not always going to get up super early, and that's okay. That might not even be part of what you need to do. We're sharing what works for us and things we're trying because we just assume if it's working for us, maybe it'll work for someone else, maybe not.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just need to be reminded, that we need help. It is okay. It is important to ask for help. I think about the Oprah, the David Goggins, like, they have a care team, right? We have therapists, we have coaches, we have doctors, we have it all. And for those athletes who are crazy grit, on fire, rest is a part of their performance. Mm-hmm. And when I think about that, I'm like, yes, okay, we need to recharge. There's nothing wrong. It is needed. And it's okay to ask for help. And that's a part of the grit, is having that help, not doing it all alone, putting our ego aside and speaking our truth.
Totally. So set the expectation with yourself that you will show up every day and do your best, but you will not be perfect. And that's where grace shows up. And you're going to diminish your impact on your life and the people around you if you try and do it all. So just remember that tomorrow is a new day. and you will do your best again. And if you know you're not showing up as your best self, turn back to grit.
Yeah, and the goal is growth, not perfection. Perfection does not exist. There's no such thing, just your best. And enjoy your life and do it with intention. Live every day 1% better than who you were yesterday so that you can have that grit and you can hold space for that grace.
We've recognized that grace and grit are different for Brooke and I. They're different for everyone that's listening. And so we really want you to just, as you listen to an episode like this or any episode, really reflect on your life and where you're at, knowing that, we all just want to feel good and feel happy and fulfilled. And that's the purpose of this episode, is for you to think about your fulfillment and think about what gives you meaning and purpose, knowing we gave a lot of examples that they may not even align with where you're at in your season of life. And so just think about, what it is that will give you a little bit more fulfillment or ease or peace or happiness or whatever that feeling is that you're kind of searching for. There's not one way of thinking about grit and grace. This is just our lived experience.
Yes, and as we share these 3 gold stars we have for you, know that the purpose of them is to help you feel good and to live with intention.
1, reflect on what grit and grace look like for you in this season of life.
2, establish one self-care practice that you can commit to every single day so you fill your cup up and have something to give.
3, ask yourself before you go to sleep, how can I show up for my future even more tomorrow? All right, Unleashing Ivy, surprise question for Brooke. Brooke,
Hit me.
What is your indicator that you can give more and that it's time for some more grit?
I'd say a good indicator is when I start to play the victim card of, poor me, or the comparison game of they have it so much better, or just kind of feeling blah about myself. It's almost like, not that I have to prove something to myself, but I know that by doing one small thing just to make me feel better, right? Whether it be get up, close my phone, go to bed, go to the grocery store, cook a good meal, like whatever it may be, it's something that's going to allow me to be proud of myself. And so it's the act of just doing something to move that emotion through me of like, ugh, and like, yeah.
It's so cool that you've tied that yucky victim feeling to a yearning for wanting to be proud of yourself. Like, that's powerful.
Yeah. Well, think about it. It's your thoughts, right? So when I'm feeling that way, my thoughts, whether I'm aware of them or not, are creating that feeling, and owning that only I have the power to switch that, right? If I can have the ability to feel that way, like I have the ability to feel a different way. And by small actions, I can switch that. Top 3 ideas for someone who is struggling to give themselves grace. 3 things they can do.
Oh, that's a toughie.
And maybe just, since it's your lived experience, 3 things that help you.
I am such a health coach because what comes to mind is setting some goals. Like it's like I need grace, but it's like I know that I'll be more forgiving of myself if I'm looking forward. If I'm like, you know what, I feel like crap, I need some grace, but like I just kind of get into action mode of I'm feeling crappy, like what can I do about it? Mm-hmm. And I also ask Justin for help. Like I'll tell him, like even yesterday, I was like, I'm not managing my time really well. I know it's this gap between Christmas and New Year's and all of this timing that like it's meant to relax and rejuvenate, but like my house is a mess. I don't feel good. And I was kind of looking for some grace, kind of looking for that from him. And so I would definitely say it's a social connection for sure. It's setting some goals that I'm not like doing in the moment, but it's like telling myself like you're totally capable of these goals, whether I get to them that day or not. And I think when I need grace, it's telling myself that these are teachable moments. Like I made a mistake. I said something harsh. I didn't follow through with something that I knew was important or didn't get things done in the timeline I wanted. Like this is a teachable moment. How can I use it to move myself forward, knowing that like nothing is ever really a mistake. It's just a lesson, and it's just going to help you move forward and level up your life eventually.
Yes. Going off of that, something I found super helpful, super powerful is when you don't look at it as a teachable moment, as a learning lesson, right? You get stuck in that shame, that, I should have, I could have, I would have, poor me. And that is just sucking your energy. And so recognizing there's nothing I can do about it, but I can learn from it. Let's let it go, release that energy, and use that energy on something more productive.
And it's an example moving forward. It's an example. It's an example for whoever witnessed your mistake. It's an example for your kids, your partner, your friend, yourself. Like showing yourself like, damn, that was some integrity right there. I owned my shit, and I'm not going to let myself continually beat myself up. I'm going to move forward because I'm a badass.
Yeah. And the only problem with that is when you don't own it, right? When you beat around the bush, when you lie about it, when you don't acknowledge, like, I did it. So own it, move on.
Yes. And now we're going to send you off with our piece of gold from Rumi.
Rumi says, you were born with potential. You were born with goodness and trust. You were born with ideals and dreams. You were born with greatness. You were born with wings. You are not meant for crawling, so don't. You have wings. Learn to use them and fly.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold.